Lieutenant Mark Holly drifted in the cold, endless void of space. His fighter had been destroyed in the battle, leaving him stranded in nothing but his emergency escape pod. The stars stretched around him like tiny, distant lights, but none of them could save him. His oxygen levels were dropping fast, and the distress beacon on his pod blinked weakly. He checked his communicator again. No signal. The nearest human fleet was too far away. If no one found him soon, he wouldn't have much time left. Mark leaned back, staring at the small window of the pod. His breath fogged up the glass as he exhaled. He had always known that being a fighter pilot was dangerous, but he never thought he would die alone in deep space. Then something changed. A shadow moved across the stars. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But then, a massive ship appeared, emerging from hyperspace like a silent predator. It was not human. The ship was dark green with sharp, angular edges, unlike the smooth designs of human vessels. Mark's heart pounded. Was it another pirate ship? Was this how he was going to die? The alien ship slowed down, positioning itself near his escape pod. Mark's console flickered to life as a message came through. The language was unfamiliar at first, but his suit's translator quickly adjusted. Human vessel detected. Status: critical. Permission to board. Mark hesitated. He had no idea who these aliens were, but he also had no choice. If he refused, he would run out of air soon. With a shaky hand, he pressed the communicator button. Permission granted. A bright blue tractor beam surrounded his escape pod, pulling it gently toward the alien ship's docking bay. Mark gripped the sides of his seat, feeling the sudden movement. His heart pounded in his chest. As the pod settled inside the ship, the door in front of him hissed open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of metal and something unfamiliar, like spices mixed with earth. Mark unbuckled his harness and stepped out cautiously. Standing before him were three tall figures, their scales shimmering under the ship's artificial lights. Their eyes were sharp, glowing faintly like embers. They had strong, muscular bodies, with armor covering their chests and arms. One of them stepped forward, taller than the rest. His scales were dark bronze, and a long scar ran down the side of his face. He studied Mark with piercing yellow eyes. "I am Captain Vorkesh of the Silari Dominion. You are in need of assistance." Mark swallowed hard. The Xilari were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors. They rarely interfered with human affairs, and they certainly didn't have a reputation for rescuing stranded pilots. I was attacked by pirates. My squadron was wiped out." His voice was hoarse. He had barely spoken since the crash. Vorkesh nodded. "You are safe now. Come with me." Mark hesitated, but what choice did he have? He followed the captain through the dimly lit corridors of the ship. The auxiliary crew members watched him curiously but said nothing. They entered a large chamber filled with technology Mark had never seen before. Vorkesh gestured toward a chair. "Sit. Your body is weak." Mark sat, too exhausted to argue. A robotic arm extended from the ceiling, scanning him with a soft green light. His suit's diagnostics flickered on his wrist, confirming that his oxygen levels were stabilizing. Vorkesh crossed his arms. "Why were you fighting pirates alone?" Mark sighed. "I wasn't alone. We were on a patrol mission when they ambushed us. My entire squad was destroyed. I barely made it out." The auxiliary captain remained silent for a moment, then said, "A warrior should not die alone in the void. That is not an honorable death." Mark looked up, surprised. "You believe in honor?" Vorkesh's eyes gleamed. "Honor is everything." Mark studied the alien leader carefully. The auxiliary were supposed to be cold and ruthless, yet this one had saved him. "Why?" "You could have left me out there," Mark said slowly. "Why did you save me?" Vorkesh tilted his head. "Would your people not do the same?" Mark thought about it. Humanity fought for survival, for victory, but not always for honor. Not like this. Some would, he admitted, but not all. Vorkash gave a slow nod. Then perhaps you understand why I could not leave you. For the first time, Mark felt something other than fear. He wasn't sure if it was trust, but it was close. The auxiliary captain turned toward the door. Rest, human. You will need your strength. Your journey is not over. Mark leaned back in the chair, feeling exhaustion finally catch up to him. He was alive, and for now, that was enough. But deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. Mark woke up to the soft hum of the auxiliary ship's engines. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the memory came rushing back. The battle, the escape pod, and the alien captain who had saved him. He sat up slowly, stretching his sore muscles. The room was small but comfortable. The bed was firmer than he liked, and the air had a strange metallic scent. A dim blue light glowed from the walls, giving everything a calm, eerie feeling. His flight suit was still intact, but he had removed his helmet. He ran a hand through his short brown hair, sighing. He was alive. But what now? Before he could think too much, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Captain Vorkash stepped inside, standing tall in his dark armor. His sharp yellow eyes studied Mark carefully. "You are awake," Vorkash said. Mark nodded. "Yeah, thanks for, not letting me die." Vorkash tilted his head. "I do not believe in unnecessary deaths. A warrior's life is valuable, even if he is not my own kind." Mark frowned. "Is that the only reason you saved me? Because I'm a warrior?" The auxiliary captain was silent for a moment. "Perhaps, but I also believe in honor. I would not leave even an enemy to die in the void." Mark smirked. "Well, that makes one of us. Not all humans think like that." Vorkash narrowed his eyes. "A strange way to think. Do your people not value loyalty?" Mark sighed, leaning back against the bed. "Some do. Some don't. Humanity is complicated." The captain watched him carefully before nodding. "I see." A brief silence passed between them before Vorkash spoke again. "You must be hungry. Follow me." Mark's stomach growled in response, making him sigh. "Yeah, I could eat." He stood up, stretching his arms before following the auxiliary captain out of the room. The corridors of the ship were dark and smooth, with glowing blue lights along the walls. Other auxiliary crew members passed by, their reptilian eyes glancing at Mark with curiosity, but no hostility. They entered a large hall filled with long metal tables. The air was thick with the scent of spices and roasted meat. Mark's mouth watered, even though he wasn't sure what exactly they were serving. Vorkash handed him a plate. "Eat." Mark looked down at the food. There was a piece of dark, grilled meat, some kind of yellow vegetable mash, and a small round fruit that smelled sweet. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Well, if this kills me, at least I won't die hungry." He took a bite of the meat. Surprisingly, it tasted good, like a mix between beef and chicken, with a smoky flavor. The vegetable mash was soft and slightly spicy, but not unpleasant. The fruit was the best part, sweet and juicy, almost like a peach. Vorkash watched him eat. "It is good." Mark nodded. "Yeah, not bad." "What is it?" "Vorak meat. It is strong and full of energy. The fruit is called Zairi. It is rare." Mark raised an eyebrow. "And you just gave it to me?" Vorkash's eyes gleamed. "A warrior must be strong. You will need your strength." Mark paused, then smirked. "You keep calling me a warrior." "I was just a pilot." The auxiliary captain shook his head. "No, you survived. That makes you more than a pilot." Mark didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't sure if he agreed, but something about the way Vorkash said it made him feel respected. For a while, they ate in silence. Mark glanced around the hall, watching the other auxiliary. Most of them sat in groups, speaking in their deep, rumbling language. None of them looked at him with hostility, only curiosity. After they finished eating, Vorkesh stood. "Come, there is something I must show you." Mark followed him through another set of corridors until they reached a large viewing deck. The windows stretched out in front of them, showing the endless stars outside. Vorkesh folded his arms. "Your people and mine do not trust each other." Mark glanced at him. "Yeah, I've noticed." The auxiliary captain continued. "But trust is built through action, not words. You are in my care now. That means your survival is my responsibility." Mark frowned. "Why? Why do you care?" Vorkesh turned to face him. "Because in my culture, when a warrior saves another's life, a bond is formed. It is a bond of honor. Until I return you to your people, I will protect you as I would my own kin." Mark blinked in surprise. "That's serious." Vorkesh nodded. "Yes, and if you ever save my life, the bond will be complete." Mark chuckled. "No offense, but I doubt I'll get a chance to save you." The auxiliary's eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "We shall see." Mark turned back to the window, staring at the stars. He still didn't fully trust Vorkesh, but for the first time since the battle, he didn't feel completely alone. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something more than just survival. Mark sat in the auxiliary ship's control room, staring at the massive screen in front of him. Distant stars flickered outside, but his attention was focused on the holographic map floating in the air. The ship was on course toward the nearest human station, but something didn't feel right. Vorkesh stood beside him, his sharp eyes scanning the screen. The auxiliary captain had barely spoken since their last conversation, but Mark could tell something was bothering him. "Everything okay?" Mark asked. Vorkesh didn't answer immediately. Then he pointed at a blinking red dot on the map. "We are being followed." Mark's stomach tightened. "Pirates?" Vorkesh nodded. "Yes, the same ones who destroyed your squad." Mark clenched his fists. His team had been wiped out, and now these same raiders were hunting him again. "How did they find us?" "They must have tracked your distress signal," Vorkesh said, narrowing his eyes. "They want to finish what they started." A loud alarm suddenly echoed through the ship. The screen flashed red as a warning appeared. "Enemy ships detected." Vorkesh turned to his crew. "Shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The ship shook violently as laser fire struck the outer hull. Mark grabbed onto the side of the console to keep from falling. "Can we outrun them?" he shouted. "No," Vorkesh replied. "They are faster. We must fight or escape." The ship's weapons fired back, sending bright energy bolts toward the pirate ships. One of the raiders exploded into a fiery ball, but the others kept coming. There were too many. Another blast hit the auxiliary ship, causing the lights to flicker. Sparks rained from the ceiling as the ship's engines roared in protest. "Hull damage critical," one of the auxiliary crew members reported. Vorkesh's jaw tightened. "We cannot win this battle. We must abandon ship." Mark's eyes widened. "Abandon ship? To where?" Vorkesh tapped the controls, bringing up a planetary scan. "There is a habitable world nearby. We will land there." Mark glanced at the screen. The planet below was covered in thick green forests and massive mountains. It looked wild and untouched. "Are you sure it's safe?" he asked. "No," Vorkesh admitted, "but it is our only chance." Mark didn't argue. The ship trembled as another explosion rocked the hull. Time was running out. "Prepare for emergency landing," Vorkesh commanded. The auxiliary crew moved quickly, activating escape protocols. The ship turned sharply, heading straight for the planet's atmosphere. Fire blazed around the edges of the hull as they entered the atmosphere at high speed. Mark gritted his teeth as gravity pressed him into his seat. The ship was falling fast. A final explosion rocked the vessel. "Brace for impact," Vorkesh roared. The ship crashed through the dense jungle, trees snapping like twigs as metal tore through the ground. Mark's vision blurred as the world spun around him. Then everything went dark. Surviving the wild. When Mark opened his eyes, He was lying on the jungle floor. His body ached, but he was alive. Smoke rose from the wreckage nearby, and he could hear distant animal calls in the thick trees. He groaned, pushing himself up. "Vorkesh," a deep voice answered. "I am here." Mark turned to see the auxiliary captain standing nearby, his armor scratched but intact. His reptilian eyes scanned the surroundings, already alert. Mark exhaled in relief. "We made it." Vorkesh nodded. "Barely." Other auxiliary survivors were pulling themselves from the wreckage. Some were injured, but most were alive. The pirate ships were nowhere in sight. "Looks like they didn't follow us," Mark said. Vorkesh narrowed his eyes. "Not yet." Mark swallowed hard. The jungle around them was dense, with massive trees stretching toward the sky. Strange noises echoed through the air. Animal cries, rustling leaves, and distant roars. "We need to move," Vorkesh said. "The jungle is dangerous." Mark frowned. "More dangerous than space pirates." The auxiliary captain didn't smile. "Yes." Mark sighed. "Great." They gathered supplies from the wreckage. Food packs, weapons, and medical kits. Some of the auxiliary crew began scouting the area while others tended to the wounded. Mark picked up a plasma rifle and checked the charge. "What kind of creatures are we dealing with?" Vorkesh glanced toward the shadows of the jungle. "Predators. Large ones." As if on cue, a deep, rumbling growl echoed from the trees. Mark's grip tightened on his rifle. "Tell me that was just the wind." Vorkesh's claws flexed. That was not the wind. Suddenly, the trees shook as a massive creature burst from the foliage. It stood on 4 thick legs, its body covered in dark, armored scales, its glowing red eyes locked onto them, and it let out a deafening roar. Mark's stomach dropped. "Oh, that's bad." Vorkesh stepped forward, his blade gleaming in the light. "Stay behind me, human." The creature charged. Mark raised his rifle, heart pounding. "No way, we fight together." Vorkesh glanced at him, then nodded. "Then let us fight." Mark grinned. "Now you're speaking my language." Together, human and Silari prepared to battle the jungle's deadliest predator. Their survival had only just begun. The massive beast roared, shaking the trees with its deep, thunderous growl. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Mark and Vorkesh as it crouched, muscles tensed, ready to strike. Mark's heart pounded as he gripped his plasma rifle. He had faced enemy pilots, but nothing like this. A wild, armored predator. This was a new kind of fight. "Stay calm," Vorkesh said, his deep voice steady. He raised his blade, standing firm. "Do not show fear." Mark swallowed. Easier said than done. The beast lunged. Mark rolled to the side just in time, barely avoiding the creature's massive claws as they tore into the ground where he had been standing. Vorkesh moved with inhuman speed, dodging the attack and slashing at the beast's side. His blade struck the thick armor, but the creature barely flinched. Mark aimed his rifle and fired. A bright plasma bolt struck the creature's shoulder, sending sparks flying. The beast let out a furious screech, but didn't fall. "Its armor is too strong," Mark shouted. Vorkesh growled. "Aim for the eyes or the joints." The creature turned, swinging its thick tail. Mark dove out of the way, barely avoiding a direct hit. The tail slammed into a tree, snapping it in half like a twig. Mark gritted his teeth. This thing is a walking tank. The beast lunged again, aiming for Vorkesh. The auxiliary captain dodged left. But this time, the creature was faster. A massive claw struck him, sending him crashing into the dirt. "Vorkesh," Mark shouted. The auxiliary groaned, pushing himself up. His armor was cracked, but he was still alive. Mark's mind raced. They needed a new plan. Direct attacks weren't working. Then, an idea hit him. He turned to Vorkesh. "We need to trap it. The trees, can we bring them down?" Vorkesh glanced at the towering trees around them, then nodded. "Yes, If you can lure it to the right spot, I can cut them down. Mark took a deep breath. All right. I'll be the bait. Vorkesh's eyes narrowed. That is reckless. Mark grinned. I know. Before Vorkesh could argue, Mark sprinted forward, waving his arms. Hey, ugly. Over here. The beast roared and charged. Mark ran toward a cluster of large trees, weaving between them as fast as he could. The creature smashed through the jungle after him, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Vorkesh positioned himself near one of the thickest trees, gripping his blade tightly. He watched as Mark dove behind the tree at the last second. Now, Mark shouted. Vorkesh's blade flashed. With one powerful strike, he sliced through the tree's base. The massive trunk groaned, then tipped forward. The beast realized the danger too late. With a thunderous crash, the tree came down, slamming onto the creature's back. The weight pinned it to the ground. The beast roared and thrashed, but it was trapped. Mark didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and aimed at its exposed eye. Sleep tight. He pulled the trigger. A bright plasma bolt shot forward, striking the beast's eye. The creature let out one final screech before falling still. Silence filled the jungle. Mark exhaled and lowered his rifle. That was way too close. Vorkesh stepped forward, studying the fallen beast. You fought well, human. Mark smirked. Not bad for a pilot. Vorkesh nodded. Not bad at all. A new challenge. With the beast defeated, the group had a moment to breathe. The auxiliary survivors emerged from their hiding places, their eyes filled with awe. The human and the captain killed it, one of them murmured. Another nodded. Perhaps he is not as weak as we thought. Mark overheard them and rolled his eyes. Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence. Vorkesh placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. They respect strength. You have earned it today. Mark sighed. Great. Now what? Vorkesh turned to the wreckage of their ship. Now we prepare. The pirates may still come. Mark groaned. Of course they will. Together, the human and the auxiliary survivors began setting up a camp. They gathered supplies, reinforced defenses, and planned their next move. As night fell, Mark sat by the fire, staring at the stars. He had started this journey as a pilot who had crashed into enemy territory. Now he was fighting alongside an alien captain, surviving on a wild planet, and preparing for another battle. It was strange, but for the first time, in a long time, he felt like he belonged. Mark sat by the fire, staring at the glowing embers. The jungle around them was quiet, but he knew it wouldn't last. Their ship was destroyed, their supplies were limited, and worse, the pirates might still be hunting them. Vorkesh stood nearby, watching the night sky. His reptilian eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. You seem worried, Mark said. The auxiliary captain didn't turn. I am always worried. It keeps me alive. Mark smirked. Yeah, well, I prefer sleep. Before Vorkesh could reply, a sudden noise echoed through the jungle. A deep hum, low but powerful. Mark sat up, eyes narrowing. What was that? One of the auxiliary scouts rushed into the camp, breathing heavily. Captain, the sky. Look. Everyone turned their heads upward. In the darkness above, faint lights flickered between the stars. Not natural lights. Engines. Ships. Pirates. They found us, Mark muttered. Vorkesh clenched his fists. Prepare for battle. A desperate defense. The survivors moved quickly. Mark and the auxiliary warriors grabbed weapons and took positions behind rocks and fallen trees. They had no walls, no shields, only the jungle and their own strength. Mark checked his plasma rifle. So what's the plan? Vorkesh pointed toward the trees. We cannot fight them directly. We must make them come to us. Mark nodded. Ambush. Vorkesh's eyes gleamed. Yes. The pirate ships hovered overhead, scanning the wreckage of the auxiliary vessel. A bright beam of light swept across the jungle. Mark's heart pounded as he pressed himself against the ground. How many do you think? Vorkesh studied the ships. Too many. Mark sighed. Great. Moments later, the ships landed. Metal ramps lowered, and armored figures stepped onto the jungle floor. Their helmets glowed in the darkness, red lights shining like demonic eyes. Mark recognized them. These were the same raiders who had destroyed his squad. His grip tightened on his rifle. Time for payback. The battle begins. The pirates moved carefully, their weapons raised. They spread out, searching for survivors. Mark stayed hidden behind a fallen tree, his finger resting on the trigger. Wait for it. One of the pirates walked right past him. Mark didn't hesitate. He jumped up and fired. The plasma bolt struck the pirate's armor, sending him sprawling. Instantly, chaos erupted. The jungle lit up with blaster fire as the Xilari warriors attacked from the shadows. The pirates scrambled for cover, caught off guard. Vorkesh moved like lightning, his blade flashing in the dark. He cut down one raider, then another, his strikes precise and deadly. Mark fired at another pirate, but the enemy dodged, returning fire. A plasma bolt shot past Mark's shoulder, burning a hole into a tree behind him. They have better weapons, Mark shouted. Vorkesh growled. Then we must be smarter. Mark ducked behind a rock, breathing hard. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and barely holding on. Then he had an idea. Vorkesh, the wreckage. Can we use it? The Xilari captain's eyes flickered toward their ruined ship. You have a plan. Mark smirked. Yeah, but it's crazy. Vorkesh bared his sharp teeth. Good, I like crazy. Turning the tide. Mark and a few Xilari warriors sprinted toward the wreckage while the others held the line. As they reached the ruined ship, Mark climbed inside, searching desperately. Come on there. He found what he was looking for, a power core. Still active, still dangerous. Mark grabbed a communicator and called Vorkesh. Get them closer to the ship. Vorkesh didn't question him. He and the warriors fell back, drawing the pirates toward the wreckage. Mark worked fast, setting the power core to overload. He rigged a detonator and jumped down. Everyone, get back, he shouted. The pirates, thinking they had the survivors trapped, moved in for the kill. Then, boom. The wreckage exploded in a massive fireball, sending shockwaves through the jungle. Pirates were thrown off their feet, their armor scorched by the blast. Smoke filled the air. The ground shook. Trees cracked and fell. Mark coughed, waving away the dust. He looked at the battlefield. The pirates who survived were retreating, dragging their wounded with them. Vorkesh stepped beside him, watching as the raiders fled. You did well, human. Mark grinned. Told you. I like crazy. The aftermath. The battle was over. The pirates had been driven away, but Mark knew they would return. The Xilari survivors gathered, their eyes filled with both exhaustion and hope. One of them looked at Mark. You saved us. Mark scratched the back of his head. We all fought. I just made things go boom. Vorkesh placed a hand on his shoulder. And that made all the difference. Mark sighed, looking up at the sky. They had won this battle. But the war wasn't over. And somehow he knew his journey with Vorkesh was only beginning. Smoke still lingered in the air from the explosion. The jungle was quiet again, but it was the kind of silence that came before a storm. Mark wiped sweat from his brow as he leaned against a tree, his body aching from the battle. Vorkesh stood beside him, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. The Xilari captain was wounded, a deep gash on his arm, but he stood tall, his blade still in his hand. They will return, he said. Mark nodded. Yeah. And next time, they won't be so careless. The pirates had retreated, but not because they were defeated. They had simply gone to regroup. When they came back, they would bring heavier weapons, more soldiers, maybe even air support. and Mark and the auxiliary survivors would be sitting ducks. One of the auxiliary warriors approached. "Captain, we have lost many. Our weapons are low. We cannot fight again." Vorkesh's jaw tightened. "We must. There is no other choice." Mark exhaled. "Maybe there is." Vorkesh turned to him. "Explain." Mark looked toward the sky. "We need to get off this planet." The auxiliary warrior scoffed. "And how do you plan to do that, human? Our ship is destroyed." Mark smirked. "Yeah, but theirs isn't." A daring plan. Mark's plan was simple, but dangerous. They would attack the pirates before they could launch a second assault. Instead of fighting a losing battle, they would steal one of their ships and escape. Vorkesh crossed his arms. "Risky." Mark grinned. "Yeah, but less risky than staying here and getting wiped out." Vorkesh nodded. "Agreed. Then we must move quickly." They gathered the remaining survivors and weapons. Only a handful of them were in good shape to fight, but they had no choice. The pirates' ships had landed not far from the jungle, near a rocky clearing. Their forces were still weak from the battle, which meant now was the best time to strike. "We get in, take a ship, and leave before they know what hit them," Mark said. The auxiliary warriors, though still unsure of trusting a human, followed his lead. "For auxiliary honor," one of them whispered. Mark smirked. "For survival." The infiltration. Moving through the jungle, the team reached the pirates' landing site. 3 ships stood in the clearing, their hulls gleaming under the moonlight. Pirates moved around them, repairing damage and preparing for another assault. Mark and Vorkesh crouched behind a fallen log, observing. "We need a distraction," Mark whispered. Vorkesh pulled out a small device from his belt. "A sonic grenade. It will draw them away." Mark grinned. "Perfect." Vorkesh set the grenade and threw it toward the far side of the clearing. A loud, high-pitched screech filled the air. The pirates immediately turned, their weapons raised, moving toward the noise. "Now," Vorkesh ordered. They moved quickly, slipping through the shadows toward the nearest ship. Mark climbed the ramp, his heart pounding. A pirate spotted them. Intruders. Mark cursed. So much for sneaking in. Vorkesh was already moving. His blade flashed as he cut down the guard. The rest of the auxiliary engaged the enemy, fighting with everything they had. Mark rushed inside the ship, heading straight for the cockpit. The controls were alien, but he had flown enough different crafts to recognize the basics. Come on," he muttered, flipping switches. The engines roared to life. Yes. Outside, Vorkesh and the warriors fought fiercely, but more pirates were arriving. Mark grabbed the ship's comm system. "Everyone, get inside now." The auxiliary warriors broke away from the fight, sprinting up the ramp. Vorkesh was the last one in, slashing at a pirate before jumping inside. "Go," he shouted. Mark didn't hesitate. He pulled the controls, and the ship lifted off the ground. The pirates fired at them, plasma bolts striking the hull, but it was too late. They were airborne. Mark laughed. "We did it." Vorkesh nodded, breathing heavily. "Yes, but we are not safe yet." The Great Escape. As the ship soared through the atmosphere, alarms blared. Mark checked the scanners. We've got a problem." 2 pirate fighters were in pursuit. Mark gritted his teeth. "Of course we do." The fighters opened fire. The stolen ship shook violently as blasts hit its shields. "This thing have any weapons?" Mark asked. Vorkesh moved to the co-pilot's seat, scanning the controls. "Yes, but limited." Mark smirked. "Limited is better than nothing." He swerved the ship, dodging incoming fire, while Vorkesh activated the rear cannons. The ship's guns roared to life, sending red plasma bolts toward the pursuing fighters. One of them took a direct hit, exploding into a ball of fire. Mark whooped. "Nice shot." The second fighter kept coming, weaving through the blasts. It locked onto them, preparing to fire. Mark gripped the controls. Hold on. He yanked the ship into a sharp dive, spinning wildly. The sudden movement caught the pirate off guard, and he overshot them. Mark grinned. Gotcha. Vorkash fired. The plasma blast hit the enemy ship's engines, sending it spiraling into the planet below. The ship finally broke through the atmosphere, reaching the safety of space. Mark let out a deep breath. That was insane. Vorkash looked at him, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. You are truly a warrior, Mark. Mark chuckled. Yeah, well, let's not do that again anytime soon. A new journey. They were free. The auxiliary survivors gathered in the ship's hold, exhausted but alive. One of them looked at Mark with respect. You saved us, human. Mark shrugged. Team effort. Vorkash stepped forward. You could have left us, but you did not. Mark met his gaze. You saved me first. Now we're even. Vorkash smiled. No, now we are brothers. Mark smirked. I can live with that. As the ship drifted into the vastness of space, Mark knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Mark sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the endless stars ahead. The ship hummed quietly around him. It was a stolen pirate vessel, but right now it was their only home. Behind him, Vorkash stood silently, arms crossed. His reptilian eyes studied the navigation screen. Where do we go now? Mark asked. Vorkash exhaled slowly. Home. Mark glanced at him. Your home. The auxiliary nodded. My people must know of what happened, of the ones we lost, and of the battle we fought. Mark tapped the controls. All right, but I doubt the pirates will just let us go. As if on cue, an alarm blared. The ship's sensors flashed red. Mark groaned. I knew it. Trouble. Vorkash leaned forward, scanning the screen. 3 pirate ships. Fast, heavily armed. Mark cursed under his breath. They don't give up, do they? One of the auxiliary warriors stepped into the cockpit. What do we do? Mark cracked his knuckles. We fight. Vorkash smiled. Now you are thinking like a warrior. The final battle. The pirate ships closed in fast. Their weapons lit up, charging for attack. Mark gripped the controls. Hold on. He jerked the ship to the right, narrowly avoiding a plasma blast. The stolen vessel was tough, but it wasn't built for high-speed combat. The auxiliary warriors scrambled to battle positions. We have weapons, but not enough to take all 3, Vorkash said. Mark's mind raced. Think. Then he saw it, a nearby asteroid field. He grinned. I have an idea. Vorkash gave him a sharp look. Is it a good idea? Mark laughed. Not really, but it's crazy. Vorkash bared his teeth in a warrior's grin. Then I approve. Mark pushed the engines to full power, diving straight into the asteroid field. A game of survival. The ship weaved through massive floating rocks, dodging between sharp edges and spinning debris. The pirates followed. They're still coming, Vorkash growled. Mark smirked. Good. That's what I want. He spun the ship hard to the left, squeezing between 2 giant asteroids. One of the pirate ships wasn't fast enough. It clipped an asteroid and exploded into fire and debris. One down. Mark cheered. The remaining 2 ships kept firing. Explosions rocked the stolen vessel. A red warning flashed on the screen. Shields critical. Mark cursed. We won't last much longer. Vorkash grabbed the weapons controls. Then let us take one with us. The ship's cannons fired, striking one of the pirate vessels. The enemy ship spun out of control, slamming into a floating rock. Boom! Mark whooped. That's 2. Only 1 pirate ship remained. But this one was smarter. It stayed back, waiting for them to make a mistake. Mark's hands tightened on the controls. They know we're desperate. Vorkash nodded. Then we must be unpredictable. Mark thought for a second. Then he got an idea. "You trust me, right?" he asked. Vorkesh hesitated. "Not really." Mark grinned. "Too bad." He suddenly killed the ship's engines. The stolen vessel stopped moving, but the pirate ship didn't. The enemy, expecting them to keep running, sped forward at full speed. "Now," Mark shouted. Vorkesh fired every weapon they had. A barrage of plasma blasts hit the pirate ship head-on. The enemy vessel erupted into flames, breaking apart in space. Silence filled the cockpit. Then Mark laughed. "We did it." Vorkesh exhaled, shaking his head. "You are insane, human." Mark smirked. "You're welcome. A home for a warrior." Hours later, the stolen ship entered Scifi space. Mark stared at the planet below. It was beautiful. Vast oceans, towering mountains, massive cities glowing under twin suns. The Scifi warriors watched in awe as their home came into view. One of them whispered, "We have returned." A signal came from the planet. A Scifi commander appeared on the screen, his sharp eyes scanning the ship. "Identify yourself." Vorkesh stepped forward. "I am Captain Vorkesh, son of the Iron Fang. We have survived the pirate attack. We bring warriors home." The commander's eyes widened. "You live?" Vorkesh nodded. "Yes, and we would not have, if not for this human." Mark raised a hand. "Ahai." The commander studied him for a moment. Then he nodded. "You are welcome here, human." Mark leaned back in his seat. "That's a nice change. A friendship that lasted a lifetime." When they landed, Scifi warriors greeted their returning brothers. Families reunited, warriors embraced, and honor was restored. Mark stood beside Vorkesh, watching it all. "You should stay," Vorkesh said. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Really? A human living among aliens?" Vorkesh nodded. "You have earned a place here. You are not just a survivor. You are a warrior." Mark thought for a moment. He had no home to return to, no squad, no mission. But here he had a brother, a family. He smiled. "All right, I'll stay." Vorkesh grinned. "Then welcome, brother." Mark laughed. "Just promise me one thing." Vorkesh tilted his head. "What?" Mark smirked. "No more pirates." Vorkesh chuckled. "No promises." And so, the human and the Scifi captain stood side by side, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as brothers, bound by battle, loyalty, and an unbreakable friendship that would last a lifetime.